The courtroom was packed with tension as Chief Justice John Roberts, known for his composed demeanor and firm legal hand, leveled a shocking fine of $200,000 against Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. The announcement sent murmurs through the room, with spectators exchanging stunned glances. Crockett, known for her sharp wit and unshakable presence, sat unmoved. The fine stemmed from an ongoing legal dispute regarding her vocal criticism of certain judicial decisions, which Roberts interpreted as contemptuous. Yet those familiar with Crockett's past knew she wouldn't take this quietly. Her record as a defense attorney and legislator was riddled with moments where she turned the tide with eloquence and precision. This moment, however, seemed different, personal, targeted. The gavel came down, and the order was read. Reporters' fingers flew over their keyboards. Crockett adjusted her microphone and stood, the hush in the courtroom nearly deafening. The silence wasn't just from surprise but anticipation. Everyone was waiting to see what she would say in the face of such a penalty. Her voice, calm and resonant, cut through the silence like a scalpel. She began not with outrage but with gratitude for the Constitution, for the court's existence, for the right to speak truth to power. Then, she pivoted sharply. With meticulous references to legal precedents and procedural norms, Crockett began dismantling the reasoning behind the fine. Her words were not aggressive, but they were firm, and each statement carried the weight of historical fact and legal logic. She cited Marbury v. Madison, clarified the scope of judicial authority, and pointed to specific statutes that shield legislative speech from judicial overreach. As she spoke, Roberts' posture subtly shifted. He leaned forward, brows furrowed, fingers tapping the bench. Crockett wasn't just responding as she was teaching, guiding, exposing flaws in the decision with respectful precision. Cameras outside the court streamed her every word live. The internet lit up. Legal analysts tweeted in real time, "Crockett is giving a masterclass," but her response wasn't just legal, it was human. Crockett to tell the effect such judicial punishments had on public servants, especially those from underrepresented communities. She asked, rhetorically, how many women of color had faced similar penalties for speaking up in rooms not designed for them. The weight of her question wasn't in volume, but in conviction. Her voice broke slightly, and not from weakness, but from the immense responsibility she felt carrying the stories of so many silenced voices. Reporters stopped typing. Some jurors blinked rapidly. Crockett breathed in and continued, her tone returning to that razor-sharp clarity. She reminded Roberts that fines like these weren't just numbers, they were meant to intimidate. And yet, she said, I stand here unfazed, not because the fine doesn't sting, but because justice demands more than silence. A few gasps escaped from the gallery. It wasn't grandstanding, it was truth. Judge Roberts, despite decades on the bench, looked visibly shaken, and not in anger, but in contemplation. Crockett then laid out the timeline of her service, fighting for underserved communities, defending civil liberties, and upholding constitutional integrity even when it wasn't politically popular. She reminded the court that dissent was not disobedience, it was democratic participation. She challenged the court, respectfully, to reconsider what it defined as contempt. Was it merely a disagreement, or was it the uncomfortable echo of accountability? Her rhetorical skill made each question a mirror, and in that moment, many, including Roberts, saw themselves. Crockett continued, if my voice threatens the balance of this court, then perhaps the balance was too fragile to begin with. The room was still. No one dared interrupt. By now, the courtroom felt less like a judicial proceeding and more like a lecture hall where every listener, from bailiff to judge, was learning something deeper than law, something about courage. Crockett pivoted again, shifting the attention off herself. She listed names as activists, whistleblowers, elected officials who had paid prices far steeper than a fine for standing up. She brought receipts, literally, emails, public records, clips of courtroom footage, all meticulously documented and delivered in her briefcase. She wasn't just defending herself, she was building a case for the countless who had no stage, no audience, no escape. She questioned, is this fine truly about me? Or is it a message to those who would dare follow? Her tone made it clear she already knew the answer. The air in the courtroom grew heavier with each passing sentence. Crockett's poise never faltered. but even those closest to her couldn't miss the emotional toll. Still, she pressed forward. With the kind of emotional intelligence rare in any courtroom, she spoke directly to Robertson not as a subordinate, but as an equal. She acknowledged his legacy, respected his journey, but implored him to consider the broader implications of his decision. She noted, "When power punishes speech, it rewrites freedom." And then came the moment no one expected. Crockett closed her notes, stepped back from the mic, and said, "I will not pay this fine, and not because I defy the court, but because I uphold a greater law, the one that lives in the heart of every democracy." The room erupted in not in noise, but in stunned silence. Chief Justice Roberts, visibly moved, asked for a recess. The court officers looked at one another, unsure of what came next. The cameras kept rolling. Outside, millions watched live as pundits scrambled to process what had just happened. Legal experts from both sides of the spectrum acknowledged her brilliance. Some, historically critical of Crockett, praised the decorum with which she challenged authority. A few even suggested her argument may have lasting impact on how courts interpret legislative speech. Inside chambers, Roberts sat quietly, alone for a moment, then returned to the bench. He addressed the room not with his usual force, but with visible vulnerability. He said, "Congresswoman Crockett, your words have reminded this court of something we often forget, that the law, while written in books, lives in the hearts of those who challenge it." There was no ruling yet, but his voice had changed. He acknowledged that while the initial fine was issued based on a strict interpretation of courtroom behavior, Crockett's articulation of constitutional principles demanded a review. The fine, for now, was suspended pending reconsideration. Gasps, again. Crockett nodded, not in triumph, but in quiet resolve. The system hadn't broken up, it had listened, and that, in her mind, was victory enough. In the days that followed, Crockett's speech became a case study. Law schools analyzed it, civil rights groups circulated it, editorials described her as a constitutional conscience in human form. She appeared not on talk shows, but in academic panels and policy forums, where her words could inspire reform rather than rhetoric. Judge Roberts, in a rare interview weeks later, admitted that the moment changed him. "It's not often a court gets reminded of its duty in such a profound way," he said. "Jasmine Crockett reminded me that law without empathy is just machinery." As for the fine, it was officially dismissed. The court issued a clarification stating that legislative speech, even when critical, must be protected unless it presents a clear legal threat. Roberts authored the opinion himself, citing Crockett's arguments directly. It marked the rare, historic moment when a sitting judge not only reversed his decision but credited the person who challenged him. The ruling is now cited as the Crockett principle in legal circles, a reminder of the enduring balance between power and voice. Crockett returned to Congress, not with a larger profile, but with a deeper purpose. She never mentioned the fine again. She didn't need to. In quiet moments, she would smile when young interns asked how she stayed so calm in court that day. Her answer was always the same: "I wasn't defending myself, I was defending the right to speak." Her staff knew that behind the confidence was a relentless discipline, nights of reading legal texts, writing arguments, and preparing for battles she hoped she'd never have to fight. But when the moment came, she met it with dignity. That's what leaders do. That's what history remembers. Justice Robertson Crockett would cross paths again, and not in court, but at a university lecture. He was in the audience as she spoke about justice, empathy, and accountability. When the lecture ended, he stood and clapped the loudest. He didn't owe her an apology. He had already given her something to respect. And in the end, that's what her voice earned. Not just a courtroom victory, but a place in the American democratic legacy. The fine vanished. The lesson remained. So when people ask what happened that day in court, they don't talk about a $200,000 fine. They talk about the moment the system blinked and then evolved. They talk about how one voice, steady and prepared, turned a punitive ruling into a teaching moment. And they talk about Jasmine Crockett, and not just as a congresswoman or a lawyer, but as a force of reason, respect, and revolutionary calm. She didn't shout, she didn't crumble, she stood. And when she spoke, even justice paused to listen.